I think it's just hard because our game has developed so much that it is getting so competitive at such a young age. I think everybody just needs a little reminder that it's a game, and it's the lessons that we learn through the game that help us bounce back and learning that we are resilient.
Welcome to the Car Ride Home podcast. I am excited today to be joined by Eileen Canney Linnehan, former Northwestern All-American pitcher. Did you know that he had 28 strikeouts in one game? Fun fact that I found. Former professional pitcher in both Japan and here in the NPF, Northwestern Hall of Famer. Also spent time as a college pitching coach, and currently the founder of ECL Consulting, which we will chat a lot about. Eileen, welcome to the Car Ride Home.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, we always start the car ride in the same way. So you're in charge. You get to control the music. What are we listening to on the car ride home?
My answer probably wouldn't change back then or to now, but just current pop songs. I feel like back in high school, I probably listened to a lot of Nelly. So yes. That would probably be on.
I love that. We're the same age, so I too was listening to that. Next most important question: where are we eating in the car ride home? And especially when you were a youth athlete, what did that typically look like?
So when I was younger, my dad and I would travel a lot I played a travel team that I eventually played for was 4 hours away. So we had this routine. I'm driving through Burger King and getting the city minis, typically like a sandwich, probably before or after. I think by the time we met, I was healthier with my eating habits when I would play. I couldn't eat the same type of stuff I ate back then, but yeah, I think definitely the Cindy minis, In and Out. As someone from California, I get that whenever I can. So that's up there too.
It's funny that so many players, the car rides are with their dad. It's a very common answer too. When I ask you, and you clearly spent a lot of time if your team was 4 hours away. When I ask you, what's the most memorable car ride home that you've ever had, whether youth, college, professional, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Oh, like an actual specific ride or more just like a theme? It's pertinent. I'll elaborate. Okay. It's kind of pertinent to what brought me to where I am now with what I'm doing. I think I spent a lot of time with my dad traveling to and from practices. My pitching coach was local, so there wasn't a lot of stuff, a lot of time in the car there. But my dad would sometimes be like, if he felt like we needed to kind of talk through certain things or like I needed a little kick in the pants, he'd be like, all right, like, let's go for a ride. I'm like, it's okay, you can go. And he's like, no, I need some help going to the store. I'm like, okay, here you go. This is my car ride. So we would have like these deep heart to hearts, which we still have. But the theme after the car ride would often look like me being really hard on myself and self-critical about things that I felt like I was falling short with or ways I wanted to grow and improve, which, as we'll kind of get into, personality types of the people I help is very common. Something that I think my dad did a really good job with was always reinforcing that there was a solution to it. So while we didn't necessarily know the tools and the steps to get out of my own yips from playing, I feel like he helped me see like, okay, well, yeah, that was hard. What are you going to do about it? So he always made me think that there was a step that I could take that was coming from a place of confidence. So I felt like I could get back up.
That's cool. And was your dad, probably like most pitchers' dads, was he there? Was he the one catching you at pitching practice? Like he was right there listening to your pitching coaches?
He sort of. So my pitching coach was a big group. His name was John Cox in Northern California. We just threw against a brick wall. So I would go out 3 days a week. There were 10 of us, and you would have to graduate from the small wall to the big wall, which is where like the big girls who are good were. And because I'm 5'11" and I was this size in 8th grade, I was very uncoordinated. So I started on the small wall, and my dad was at work, so I would go right after school. And I would throw against this wall, and it took me so long to just get the basic drills that all these people kept passing me. And I was like, I want to move to the big wall. And they wouldn't let me move until I like mastered it. But I got it. Eventually it clicked. I kind of learned how to get my body to do what I wanted it to.
5'11"
But
in 8th grade.
my dad would, I know.
Good for you.
I was huge. um, and my dad would catch for me at home, like on weekends more typically. But I spent a lot of time just on that wall, and I would just draw with my shoe, like the strike zone. But I'd be out there for hours.
Let's go back, because you grew up in Northern California. We've actually talked to quite a bit of Southern California players. What did travel actually? What did your first introduction to softball look like? Can you remember what your first team was? Was it your local league? What did it look like when you were first introduced to the sport?
Yeah. It was Little League. So I started when I was 10 or 11. So I started typically later than I think a lot of people do. And so, like I told you, I couldn't really figure out how to get my body to do what I wanted it to. So I could throw pretty hard, but I hit everyone. I'm sorry to anyone that listens that I hit. It was never on purpose. And I think I was trying so hard not to hit them that I was hitting them more. And then I'd get taken out, and then I'd be crying, and they'd be crying, and the whole thing would be crazy. But I started out in that. And it was fun because I just got to kind of find my footing within my friends and just the friend group there, which is really fun. But eventually I played travel at 14. So for the Chico Stars, just a local team. But again, I feel like that's so much later than what I hear about people doing now.
Do you remember when it clicked or when it changed to start? Because you started local and playing when you and your family made the commitment. You said you drove 4 hours. When was that time frame? And do you remember that conversation that you had with your parents of, all right, I'm serious, I'm into this whole travel ball thing?
Yeah. I, from a very young age, had always known I wanted to play in college. And so I would talk about it all the time. My pitching coach and I would talk about it all the time. And I would ask him this question, like, he still makes fun of me about it, but I'd be like, so when you say like, I can be good, how good will good be? Like, what does that mean? And he's like, I don't know what that means. And so then we started having these broader questions of how to get to college. And so I'm going to date myself here, but the internet, right back then, you didn't really have access to a lot of the resources. And so I like called around. I called actually Lonnie Alameda, who's coaching at Stanford at the time, and she answered her desk phone. And I was like, hi, I really want to play at Stanford. How do I do that? And I mean, obviously it's a weird question to answer for a little kid. But we started talking about different travel opportunities and seeing which teams went to which tournaments and which college coaches went to those tournaments and how to get myself in front of them. And so that's when we had to kind of make that hard decision, because unfortunately our more local team wasn't going to some of those tournaments. So I had to leave my childhood friends, which was really hard. Then I went and I played for the San Jose Strikers. So I tried out for 18U originally, and they said I wasn't ready yet. I was still too raw. So I played 16U for the fall. There's a pattern throughout my life where I feel like there have been moments where I was being passed, or like I would want something and I wouldn't get it, and then with the response to it. So this is kind of one of those moments where because I had driven 4 hours to go and try out for this team. I was exhausted. I didn't do very well. So then I was like, okay, I didn't make the 18U team, but I'm going to go and like go to the grind and try and do well at 16U to show what I'm capable of. And then they ended up moving me up the next year, like pretty quickly after.
I remember those days. So how does one get from now I remember the Northwestern team in the, I'm gonna call, what are we, like mid 2000s, early 2000s? But how did that happen from Northern California to Northwestern?
So they had been recruiting at some of the tournaments. I didn't really know a lot about Northwestern, just being so far away. And every time I would talk to them and meet them, Kate and Carol Drohan just had such a strong, amazing vision. It was very clear with their mission statement of just wanting to go to the World Series. And we're like, okay, well, sounds great, but we haven't been since the 80s. Like, how is this going to happen? And Kate always was very clear with how and just working together as a team. So when I came onto campus, I knew instantly that it was where I was supposed to be, and the people I was around they saw me, they understood me. And so then I committed.
It's funny. I was thinking of those names: Garland Cooper, Tammy Williams, Eileen Canney.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was that Northwestern team. You go back. What was it? Was it 2006 when you guys were in the National Championship Series?
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I remember that team, and I think of just how good you guys were. And I don't know. I didn't realize Northwestern, was that probably the first time that they had been back to the World Series since? What years did you go to the World Series?
2006 and 2007. So we played in 2007, right?
We played against you guys, but not in the World Series. I think we started, I think you might have been our first game of the year in 2007 after you guys were coming back from your national championship. Like, oh, good. We get Northwestern. That's great. We'll have to go look at the box score of that.
Oh, that's wild.
Well, so I want to talk about what you're doing now. And obviously a lot of this has stemmed with your consulting, with what you're doing or what happened as a player. So to start off, for people who don't know what the Yips is, how would you define exactly, we've heard it before, or maybe, I remember actually I've had a couple teammates that had the Yips. That was the first time that I had heard about it. But can you put into words, what is the Yips?
Yeah, my definition might be different than some have. I believe there's a really big spectrum between basic performance anxiety, right? And then the far end of that, which would be probably where I fell, where the brain identifies that situation and that task that you're trying to do as so dangerous and risky to your survival that it shoots your brain into fight or flight, and then it shuts off the nerve signals. So your brain and your body is cross-wired. So my left half of my brain would tell my arm that me throwing the ball overhand was so, if I missed it, it was so detrimental to my well-being that it wouldn't let me do it. So it was trying to avoid the situation. And so I couldn't feel my arm at all. I would go to throw, and my arm would just like flop down. I was fine in practice. So for a lot of the people that I help are fine in practice, fine in, you'll kind of find a pattern. There's the safer they feel to take the risk because they know that there's that good solid foundation. If they fail, then they're probably going to perform the task there. And it's always something that people can do in their sleep. So it's the task that they used to be really good at. So like I threw really hard overhand. And when I was younger, I was so afraid of, I think I almost hit someone because she like looked away. And then I would be careful, right? Because a lot of people say, be careful, be careful. We're programmed from a really young age. Oh, there's a car coming, be careful. That's dangerous, be careful, right? So my brain's like, be careful. So I would throw it, and I could feel my arm back then, but I would overthrow it and shot put it to the corner of our right field slow pitch field. And so they'd get in the park home runs. And I would be so embarrassed by it that the shame that would set in would make it was reinforcing the cycle of my brain trying to protect me. And then, so for some, so for me, it was the idea of like, I could throw hard, but then I was trying to be careful. There are some people that are really good at pitching strikes, but then suddenly they're so afraid to not throw strikes because it's the thing they're good at that their brain won't let them throw strikes. So if the strike zone's here, their brain will let them throw it everywhere except for here. So the more, and so certain personality types are more prone to this. So people pleasers, perfectionists, deep thinkers, people that like to plan. So typically the ones that their mind will drift to worst case scenario, not because they are being negative, but they're doing that so that they're not blindsided and they have a plan for it. Typically very stubborn, very driven, very hardworking. So those personality types, then when those situations happen, it goes into overdrive. And so the hyperfixation of that task, it is crazy because the amount of time, like the car rides that I was talking about earlier with my dad, we spent so much time talking about the yips and why couldn't my brain just let me do it? And why me? Why don't other people have this issue? Do more, practice more. But in reality, that's just feeding it and putting it up on the pedestal of this task that is so important.
It's so interesting because as a young player, how old were you exactly when do you think that this started?
I think I might have had them when I was pitching and hitting people, because I have people that are afraid of hitting the batters and they hit the batters because they're trying not to hit the batters. So I have to wonder if I had a little hyperfixation back then on that. But there's a game that stands out to me that was pretty traumatic where I overthrew the ball and it was not the best situation there. So I was probably 13, I would say.
Oh, wow.
And then within my travel games, we had this shift where a right fielder would come when slappers were up and stand between me and third, the pitcher and third. So we didn't have a right fielder. And so I could throw outside to slappers all day, but the moment that they would bunt to me, which happened a lot, and I would go to make the throw, we wouldn't have a right fielder. So then the same thing would happen. So the fear of losing the game was so elevated that I think my brain would just, to the point that sometimes my feet wouldn't move because if I couldn't get it, it looked like I was being lazy and not going to it, but my feet were stuck. So then if I didn't get it, I didn't have to throw it. So it's just so wild.
It's crazy. Well, where my head goes to, because being with the Alliance, right, we have a lot of youth players, but we have a lot of youth coaches who might not understand what a player is going through. And like, it definitely happened. I remember in travel ball playing against Angelica Selden, who went on to UCLA and had a similar where underhand was fine, but throwing overhand to first base was an issue. Or when I was in college, it was a couple of our catchers and throwing the ball back to the pitcher.
That one's
But
really
I have to
common.
imagine as a youth coach and youth player, the tendency is probably, well, just practice more, just throw it, just hit your target when that's not it. So that's where my head immediately goes to of how tough that is for a coach to, I guess, identify it. And how do I help my player too with recognize that? And without giving, I'm assuming that's what you're doing now, correct? Is helping those youth players, helping the youth parents recognize it, and then deal with it as well, correct?
Yeah. So it's been really cool because I have the youngest client I've helped is 9 all the way up to 75. So I have men, women, every sport you can imagine. It's the personality types are all the same. We all have the same traits that make us more susceptible for that. So if I think something for coaches to look out for are maybe the ones that seem to have who they are and what they do too intertwined. They need to be able to keep those separate. And so people pleasers, that's the biggest thing, because when there's a stressful situation, we tend to get external and try and please those around us to survive. When in reality, we need to include ourselves in that rather than focusing on our imperfections, because all of us are also perfectionists. So I have some people that are new to the Yips and they're just starting out with it. And then I have some people that are older that had them, were driven out of the sport that they loved, and are now trying to not fight the monster that has been hiding under the bed, essentially waiting for it to come and take something else. I had some people that are playing recreational sports and they're older, and it's the steps are all the same. Sometimes there's more trauma to unpack, because sometimes people get the Yips from like a really traumatic situation. Sometimes it just clicks because it matters more. So the situation is more important. So like for anyone who's read the Rick Ankiel book, he's playing in the World Series or playoffs, and it just suddenly happens. Like he can't throw a strike anymore. And no matter what he tries to do, his brain won't let his arm throw the ball to the spot he's trying to. And so it's different for everybody, but the goal is to identify the moment rather than avoiding the moment, right? So for me, if I'm playing in the World Series, right, and the ball's hit back to me, I know they're probably going to bunt to me. In my head, my worst case scenario would be, if I overthrow this, everyone's going to be mad at me. They're all going to laugh at me. No one's going to want me out here pitching because I'm a liability. And then what is my worth if I'm a liability and I'm not pitching for this thing and this team that I love so much and I wanted it so badly? So the work I do, it kind of allows them to talk through that process, because if you say that statement, people say, well, don't be negative. People don't think that. But the problem is I'm not a negative person. That's just how my brain, because I want it so badly. I want to be so careful and so protective of that thing that I love so much, right? So it's learning how to desensitize it, and also recognizing that moment that you're equipped to handle that. So there are different cancellation thoughts that I'll teach them to identify. So in that moment, rather than freaking out and being like, no, it's happening, to be like, it's happening. And now I have the tools to go and handle this and move forward.
It's interesting when you were a youth player, and then even obviously you got recruited while going through this, you get to Northwestern. Did you have tools as a youth player and in college, or were you aware of what the Yips were, or you just thought you had an issue? I'm curious of your own experience through those times.
I thought no one knew, which is hilarious because everybody knew. And I would go, and it was this thing that no one could talk about, because that's actually a common theme that I'm finding among all my clients, is the people, if they're being coached or their friends or parents, people don't talk about it because they think it's contagious and they think it will make it worse.
Interesting.
People literally think that if I'm talking to you about the Yips, that now, oh, what if I get the Yips too? Right? When in reality, it's nothing to fear. If you see it as something small, it can go away like that, instant, like with the right tools. But if it's this thing that no one talks about, it adds more shame, it adds more guilt, more embarrassment, lack of understanding of why. Because sadly, the people that get the Yips are the ones that are the first person to generally speaking, sometimes there are outliers, but generally the ones to go be supportive teammates to other people, right? They're the ones that are super compassionate and thoughtful, and they're so thoughtful that they sometimes neglect their own needs for other people's, right? So I went into it thinking, I have to hide this. I can't talk to anybody about this. There were practices where I was terrible at points or scrimmages or games. And driving home with Garland and Tammy and Courtney and Jamie and Regis, all of my closest friends, no one would talk about it. It was just this thing.
So when you say
Until
terrible
one day.
practices, sorry to cut you off. When you say terrible practices, like you overthrew first, like it would happen and then you guys wouldn't talk about it.
Yep.
Interesting.
And be like, just get her out of there. And be like, okay, I got out of it. But then everything gets shifted, right? So I would go home in the car, not talking about it. We'd be eating, hanging out. I would still be thinking about it. They probably weren't. But now my social stuff, or I'd be studying and I would be thinking about the Yips. Everything was getting shifted and displaced to where it didn't belong. So my overall anxiety was so much higher. When in reality, if in the car, they didn't know, nobody ever knows how to handle it, right? But eventually, when my junior year, so 2006, I started meeting with a sports psychologist, and the tools didn't necessarily work in the game to make the plays, but he did make me feel comfortable enough to talk about it. So one day in a meeting, I made some joke, and it was like, the room was like, like everyone was so relieved to just talk about it. So then, like after that, then we could talk about it in the car. My overall resting state wasn't so anxious because I felt more comfortable in my own skin. Yes, I couldn't make the throws, but at least it wasn't this hidden dark secret, you know? But yeah, I think that's the hardest thing. A lot of people that I work with either don't want people to know that they're going through it, but in reality, people probably do know that they're working through something. And in creating that safe connection, you feel like you're going into it with them, you know? So I think the best advice I could give in that would be to just ask them about it. Ask them if they're okay. Ask them, what do they think is going on? And if they say they don't know, sometimes I help people figure out it's not even the yes, it's just they overthink, and learning how to not be afraid of overthinking and to just play like we start playing when we're 10 years old, just to play the game, right? And so I think getting a college athlete or a professional athlete to go play with the simplicity of playing for fun instead of playing for approval, playing for a scholarship, because you're always going to be driven for the best spot as a competitive person. But if you're playing too much for that, it can make your brain fear not getting that. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. It's interesting. I'm actually thinking, because all of those personality types I have. I was just sitting there thinking about myself. If this I hopefully because I've played against you in college and in the professional league, and I honestly don't remember, because I would assume then teams started game planning. Hey, let's bunt back to the pitcher. Let's bunt back to Eileen if she's has to, either isn't going to field it or is tossing underhand. I don't remember that. Was there a moment in your career?
You don't remember?
I don't remember that.
Oh,
did
I always wonder if people do it on purpose.
Did you overcome it? Did you overcome the yips throughout or later on in your career?
Unfortunately, no. So in the pro league, I have moments when I reflect back. So for like this is a good story. So USA tryout. Okay. So I tried out twice for the USA team. So there's this defensive segment where every pitcher goes out and makes the throw to the bases, and then you switch. That was like my worst nightmare. So I went out there. The first tryout, you can imagine how this goes. It's like in the ground, over the head, in the ground, over the head. I'm like, this is horrible. I do terrible because I'm so embarrassed. I pitched bad. I obviously don't make the team. So then fast forward like years later, I remember leaving or prior to that, I leave the tryout being so frustrated with myself because I felt like I let that be the reason that I sold myself short. So even if I had a bad throwing exhibition, not being able to put that away and actually pitch how I can pitch during the pitching part, right? But because I bore that so deeply, and it was this thing I dreamt of my whole life, this opportunity, I was so grateful. A lot of times people that feel really grateful for opportunities because they're getting a life-changing opportunity, or they're getting a scholarship, or it just means more. That's when they sometimes amplify the importance of it. So Pro League happens. Then they ask me to go back, and I'm 25. And I'm like, all right, here we go. They're probably going to have the same defensive thing. I'm not going to worry about it anymore. And this is where stubbornness plays in. And this is something that I think my dad would tap into a lot. I go into it, I'm like, I might overthrow it, but I'm not going to overthrow it because I'm worried about it. So I just like threw it, and it was like a mic drop moment. I walked off the field, and I was like, oh, I did it. But and I ended up making the team. But looking back, I think if I had bottled up that tool and used that in games, I would have been fine. But I think that I didn't fully understand what I was doing, right? And so then I went and played in Japan, and they're small ball, and I mean, they were bunting to me nonstop, doing delayed steals, and we had good solutions for it. My dad, I remember this point where my dad was like, they're probably going to bunt to you on purpose. And I was like, I know, Dad. And then he's like, well, let's make your rise ball better. If your rise ball is better, when they bunt to you, it's going to be a double play. I was like, oh, that's smart. Okay. Good idea. I used my knowledge or their knowledge to kind of go. And it's funny because I'm talking a lot about my dad, but the funny thing and amazing thing about my mom is that she would just tell me how you look so cute out there. I just love you so much. I love that. The unconditional love, I felt so loved all the time. So I think that combination allowed me to go and fight. I didn't necessarily know the other cancellation stuff, but anyway.
It's
pretty wild to look back.
I'm curious, did you guys actually did you label it the Yips? Or at what point throughout this journey did you actually say, I think I have the Yips, and maybe even start researching what that is?
I definitely used the word with my parents. I think I was afraid to call it that for a long time, but I do remember looking up on the internet the Yips and Steve Sachs, because before you would Google things and there was nothing that would ever, it was just the people who've had them, rather than this is how you should get over it. This person can help you. And so the name Steve Sachs came out a lot in that one, and just some of the people that had struggled with it through baseball. But people are so mean. They're there are cartoons about the Yips with squirrels, their eyes are all googly. Oh no, the whole team has the Yips. It's mean. People would laugh. People would make fun of me. Just bunt it to her. She can't throw it. People are mean. Yeah. And so I can only imagine now with the social media platforms, it's so, and these young athletes, right? This is a very fixable thing. It is nothing to be scared of. It's something that so many people have experienced, but it can't be seen as this scary monster.
That's exactly, you beat me to it, but I was thinking about just the Women's College World Series just got done, right? What was it? Almost 13,000 fans in the stands and 2 million viewers. The pressures are heightened, the visibility, which there's a lot of good in that, but also if there is an issue, how that could be magnified, and the toughness, the pressure, and then it would live on forever on social media, right? I have to imagine going through this as a player, this is what motivates you now to help others? Not just in softball. I know you're working in other sports, but when did that moment happen for you that you're like, hey, I went through this as a player. Now I think I can help more players. What was that transition of going like to now creating your
Yeah.
own consulting company?
So I played until I was 26, and I transitioned straight from that into coaching at UIC, so University of Illinois, Chicago. And one of my players there had the same situation that I had, but the way that we would speak about it, and I started doing research and just I was in it with her to try and solve her issue, and she got over it. It was amazing. So through the research, plus I think my anticipation of knowing where her thoughts are going and saying something that I know would kind of get there before she would go to those thoughts allowed her to get through that. And she said to me one time, you need to go tell, her name is Bridget Boyle, you need to go help more people. And I was like, yeah, because it's this thing that no one ever talks about, right? So I was always like, oh, yeah, okay. And then she's like, no, like, actually, you changed my life. I want you to realize how much you helped me in just that approach. I think you should. So back in 2013, I spoke at convention, and I was so nervous. I was like sweating and like, oh my God, everyone's going to hear my story. I'm revealing this thing. But I had done a Survey Monkey before, this asking questions of if the people had them before, played with someone that had them, or coached someone who had them. And the results were through the roof. So then I'm like, okay, I asked, what questions do you want to know? What have answers to, and what does it feel like, and all of that. And so after speaking there, I mean, it was so, it's like one of those moments where you're like raw, you're like very vulnerable, right? You're telling everyone your stuff, and then everyone's staring at you already, which public speaking can be scary. So then after that, all these coaches came up to me and said, I have someone I would love for you to talk to. Can you help them? I was like, well, I can help them the best I can. Like, I hadn't fully created my method yet that I have now. But I would love to. So I started mentoring all these people, and some of them were getting over their stuff. Some of them weren't, but either way, they felt like they had someone that understood them. So I did that for probably about 9 or 10 years. And then I realized that I was becoming so fast with helping people get through them. Like, I need to do more with this. Like, if I can help someone overcome it within a day, which is the fastest I've had.
Wow.
I've had it. I mean, it's different for everybody, but it's essentially how ready are they to implement the stuff I'm teaching. And then there's this idea of part of my business model is the black bear approach. So if you see a black bear, you're supposed to get big and fight them back. When you're in reality, your instinct is to run and scream or hide, right? But it will instantly eat you. So it's teaching them that to survive it, they have to see it as something, or see the personality traits as something that can make them more susceptible to that part, but to not fear it and learn in acceptance of that. It actually goes away faster. And then they feel like in that moment that's scary, they can get big, they can fight back.
How are you working? Are you doing one-on-one? Is it group? Do you have multiple athletes? Is it all virtual? I'm so curious of actually what the setting is of how you're working with athletes.
They're all over FaceTime, Zoom, or Skype. It's typically one-on-one. Sometimes I'll have team things too. I'm not a licensed therapist. I do have a background in psychology. Sometimes it does kind of it am following their lead. So it does have a flow of that. But sometimes in order for them to fully get the physical outcome they want, they have to work through the emotional and mental stuff first. And especially if they're younger or older and have maybe been told, like my whole life, I'm very sensitive. And so I, for a long time, felt really insecure about being overly sensitive. When in reality, my sensitivity is beautiful and something that helps me help people. But learning to create that boundary of, am I being overly sensitive or not? Am I being driven or overly driven? Right. I was listening to Sierra Romero's interview in this, and she said something that she wishes her younger self knew was that it's okay to take breaks and that more doesn't always bring more. And that is the most true thing, because people that are susceptible to get the yips or have over performances, right? The thought of being 100% sounds lazy, right? It's like, oh, 100%. No, I'm going to do 110%. But at a certain point, when the muscle memory is ingrained and the growth mindset, the work ethic naturally will get better just by how hard you practice, right? If you put that combination together with the 110%, it makes them get up to like 500%. And they perform worse physically at 500 than they will down at 100. So doing more doesn't actually serve them well. It's very detrimental to their actual physical outcome.
That's really interesting. What I keep going back to, and I'm thinking about myself as a teammate, and it was our junior year, and literally both of our catchers got the yips, and it was more throws back to, I think it was my sophomore year, because I was playing second base and I would have to go behind the pitcher to back up the throw. But I'm wondering now, I'm questioning myself as a teammate, and like, did I handle that well? Could I have been a better teammate? So what's your advice to, if I have a teammate that's going through the yips and going through it, how can I be a better teammate? What would your advice be to me?
Well, I think you going behind the pitcher to back up is you showing up for her, because the people that are going through the yips don't typically ask for much. So I think maybe going up to your teammate and saying, what can I do to help you in this moment? They might say nothing, but just the simple action of you asking that question demonstrates that. I think you being there, and I just remember playing against you, you're always like, you're just wonderful. So like your smile, I'm sure is like
a little competitive,
making them so competitive though, but like making them feel like you're there with them. My third baseman, Darcy Sangwald at Northwestern, I don't know if you remember her name, but she used to tell me, you better move because I'm going to push you over if you try and take that bunt for me. So even though I couldn't make the throw, I felt like she was in my back pocket and like going to do everything she could to save me.
That's cool.
And I'm not typically someone that lets people save them, but it was the sweet bond that I had there. So you going behind there, you are going to save your catcher. I would be curious if you had that conversation with them now, if that did help. Catchers typically, I have a lot of catcher clients. Catchers typically get it because they're worried about inconveniencing the flow of the game. And they are trying so hard to not, especially if someone's on base, they don't want the runners to score. But sometimes pitchers will make faces and get annoyed because they have to like go get the ball. Whether they know they're doing it or not. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Catchers also will fear overthrowing them, even if they're their best friend and the most loving and welcoming. Like, it's okay, just you can give it to me no matter what. I don't care. They love them so much that they're also going to not want to mess with them when they're with them. But then if you think about within like lessons, right? So if a catcher comes and catch for a pitching lesson, I have that all the time with my kids I teach in pitching. And I can tell sometimes when my catchers are getting afraid to hit me because I'm too close to the pitcher. And I'm like, it's okay. I don't care. Just throw it. I'm okay. So it's sometimes that tight space. Sometimes that can be a traumatic incident for people. Sometimes it's the wide open field where, like, if they overthrow it, there's nothing back there in their mind. And so all they need to do is throw it right here. But all their brain sees is everywhere else they could miss. Yeah, you showing up behind your pitcher, you're there for the whole team, you know, and I think that might create that like safer space.
It's interesting you said, so with pitchers, I don't know, because it's physical, right? Where you're throwing underhand in softball, and then it's the throw to first base, the overhand throw. Are there any other positions, or would you say in the sport of softball, do you see it a lot with the yips with pitchers and catchers? Are there any other positions that you've seen some common, or maybe it doesn't even matter, position?
Yeah, no, it does actually. I would say catchers and pitchers are the most. I have the most throwing strikes for pitchers. So sometimes if a pitcher suddenly just loses the strike zone, they're not losing the strike zone for their lack of trying, or probably trying too hard. And sometimes it's overhand too for them. So I would say that sometimes they're worried about hitting people. This one's actually pretty common, like the short throw. It's always typically the shorter throws. So like a cutoff, right? So an outfielder throwing to a cutoff, that one's pretty common. I've had hitters. This one's happening younger. So this is really helpful, I think, for people. People freezing in the batter's box because they are afraid of getting hit, or they're literally blacking out. Like they don't even like, their brain's just like completely desensitizing from that moment, just like protecting them. Sometimes they bail. I haven't helped this client, but I've heard of a client where would try and catch a ball and their arm wouldn't extend to catch the ball in the outfield. Yeah. So it can show up in every different way, but it's something that their brain is saying, if you suddenly can't do this, or if you don't make this simple play that you should be able to do, then everyone's going to make fun of you. And the shoulds, right? It's I kind of explain it like at a young age we learn right and wrong, right? You know better not to do something. You know not to go and throw water in someone's face, right? You're going to get in trouble for that. But if it's an accident, then it's not a punishable. It shouldn't be punished. It's an accident. An accident is literally not being intended to happen. So just because it's a mental error, and people say mental errors are avoidable errors, but that for our personality type, right? Our personality type, that's not true. If you make it this thing that is not allowed to happen, our personality type will sit there and fester and hyperfixate on it, and it will happen more. For people who are genuinely lazy and don't think of others, those errors could maybe be avoided. But that's not this side.
I'm curious, with personality types, do you think that there's an opportunity maybe to get, if I'm a coach, would you encourage them to maybe dive deeper to better understand the personality types, to maybe, and this could just be proactive or maybe just of understanding their players? Have you done any just like formal assessments of personalities?
That's on my agenda of things I want to do this next year. I haven't done that other than when I ask them, I list out the things, my findings that I have, and they're all perfectionists, people pleasers, thoughtful, deep thinkers, all those types. But I think for coaches because not every kid can be coached the same,
Right.
you know, somebody's already so mad at themselves that if they're physically like freaking out publicly. Maybe they're doing that because they're feeling so bad on the inside that they're doing that as a self-defense mechanism so other people don't come on them, right? So that they're not saying, how could you do that? What's happening to you? When in reality, you know what I'm saying? So that like they already feel terrible. And what they need is support and making them feel like they're not defined by what they do. Who they are is who they are. And letting them learn to create their own boundaries within a safe space is really important. I think it's just hard because our game has developed so much that it is getting so competitive at such a young age. I think everybody just needs a little reminder that it's a game, you know, and it's the lessons that we learn through the game that help us bounce back and learning that we are resilient. It's really helpful.
That's it. I would definitely encourage you to when you were talking, that's what I was thinking about is like maybe if we could identify the personality types. And we still live in a world, even though our game is growing and evolving, a majority of travel ball is coached by, parents, or that's not their full-time job. And so they're showing up to practice and showing up to tournaments and might not have that full understanding of the athlete. And those quick tools like that maybe could help in the development of that athlete. Switching gears here really quick, but I typically end on some rapid fire. But this is too good and too deep. I don't want to necessarily like do quick question, but I do have a couple. One, do you have a favorite success story? And it can be anything, maybe of just how far one of your athletes came or a particular story, but anything that comes to mind, a favorite success story.
It's hard because I also, with confidentiality, I don't want to reveal some of that stuff. I mean, can I say myself?
Of course.
So when I throw, I am so excited if I ever feel nervous. I'm like, ooh, I wonder if I'm going to get them. And because I'm so obsessed with the whole idea of the Yips, they never come. So I can play catch with my daughter. I can throw. I used to not even be able to throw the ball back to an umpire to switch the ball. Right now, I can throw the ball to my kids in the game, in Little League, in any platform, in my lessons if I'm catching for them. I never, ever, ever, like the amount of time and tears and thoughts that I had about the Yips from 13 to 26 consumed so much of my space. It's something that I'm kind of shocked that mine are gone. So that would be one of them. I think a lot of my relationships that I have with my clients are really special because it starts out as the initial meeting is about the Yips, but then helping them see the light out of some of their darkness that they've had in their life, whether it's family trauma, relationship trauma, any of that stuff. Obviously, I'm not a therapist, but it's just them having a space to speak. But it shows up sometimes through the game. And then they go and they play great. Physically, I've had a lot of clients get through their stuff, which if you told me when I was younger that you can get over the Yips and throw great, I'd be like, sure I can. But I've had so many that I wholeheartedly stand behind what I do. But I think I'm most proud of just seeing them be happy. That's like so corny. I just love seeing them be happy.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, you already kind of alluded to it, and I love that you did answer yourself as well. Because what would be one thing, without giving all your secrets away, but what would be one thing you would go back and now and tell your younger 13-year-old self when things were first happening? What's one thing that you would have told yourself?
To fight for myself instead of attacking. I mean, because it's deep, right? It is part of, because you have those personality traits, it's part of who you are. And so I think that can cause, like, those are the reasons why our coping mechanisms in the scary situations happen that way. But if I had told myself, be who you are, fight for yourself, even in moments where it's scary, even if other people do it different than you do it, fight for yourself and don't be so eager for approval. You have to approve of yourself first. So I think learning to have maybe more self-love and compassion at a younger age. And I didn't even necessarily know that I didn't. I just know that in all of those moments, I felt so alone. But if I had created that voice for myself, having that internal ally, my internal dialogue, my internal self-talk, when I didn't actually want to accept support and love, because people say like, oh, it's okay, you'll get it. And I'd be like, they're just saying that. But if I had actually believed it, I think I would have been so much happier and probably gotten through it faster.
Well, that's what I think is so cool of what you're doing now, and the ability to speak openly about it, share your story, and now help. I have to shout out Claire, who does our podcast producer behind the scenes, but Claire went through the Yips as an athlete, and she read your story. And I was like, we've got to get Eileen on. I'm like, wait a second. I know Eileen. So, but shout out to her, because that is somebody that through you even just talking about it, even though she's done with her career, it's helped her deal with it. So it's still, just hope you know that you are impacting beyond just your clients. But if somebody is listening, and whether they're a coach, whether they're a parent, they're an athlete, and if I want to train with you, if I want to connect with you, how do I go about doing that?
I have some social media platforms. I have a website, not the most elaborate, but it's a way to kind of connect. And then I will contact them and then move forward from there. But yeah, just anything through that stuff I'd love to help more people.
I love it. Well, I appreciate what you're doing, and thank you for sharing your story. And thanks for joining us on the car ride home. Hey guys, we hope you're enjoying the Car Ride Home podcast. Hopefully we're filling the air and making your car ride home a little bit more enjoyable. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube, and leave us a review. If you have any special guest or requests that you'd like to hear, or have us bring a guest or a story onto the podcast, shoot us an email, info@thealliancefastpitch.com. We'd love to hear from you.